Okay, so today we're discussing the theory of demand. Okay, so consumers demand goods and services, and the question is, how much do they actually demand? Okay, so what is the amount that the consumer will demand given what is available to him? Okay, so one way that we are looking at it is we're looking at it as a viewpoint of utility. That means satisfaction. Same word, it's the same meaning. A consumer will demand goods and services up until a point where at a point where he's maximized his satisfaction for that good or service. Okay, so he wants to maximize it. So he will demand more and more up until a specific point. And then his satisfaction will start to become less. I will use an example just now to explain it. So we're looking at the theory of consumers and demand, and specifically we're looking at utility, or the level of satisfaction of a consumer that will eventually determine his demand for the specific good or service. So what are we going to look at? We're going to look at a couple of terms. So I need you to understand what is utility. I need you to understand what's marginal utility and total utility, what's weighted utility. We'll look at consumer equilibrium. Then we have to derive or to draw a demand curve and also a budget line. Okay, very basic, very introductory, but it sets the scene for us to understand how a consumer makes a decision on the quantity of specific goods and services. So let's start with an example. Let's start with let's say a cupcake. Okay, so I'm a consumer, and today I have a couple of rand with me, or a couple of 100, 200 rand with me, and I need to decide I'm going to buy cupcakes. So I buy, let's say, 10 cupcakes. So the first cupcake that I eat, it provides me a lot of satisfaction. It gives me a lot of satisfaction. It tastes nice. It smells good. I like it. I want to eat more. Okay, so I eat the first one. So that gives me a value in terms of satisfaction. Before I continue, just want to clarify. When we look at utility or the level of satisfaction, we must have a way to measure it. Okay, so there's two ways of measuring utility. The first one is using ordinal utility. Ordinal utility means we order goods in a sequence of our preferences. The second one is cardinal utility. Cardinal utility means we can somehow give a value to a specific good, or the value of the satisfaction that it provides us. So cardinal utility is what we're going to use. We are saying that we can actually measure the consumption of a specific good through cardinal utility. So we can give a value of utility for each good that we consume. So we're using cardinal utility as a way to measure the utility. So now I'm eating my first cupcake, and let's say the utility that I get from that, or the marginal utility that I get from consuming one cupcake, is high. So let's say out of 100, that's 100. The second cupcake still looks good. It still smells good. But it's not exactly the same value. The satisfaction that I get is not 100% the same. So I will say out of a value of 100, the utility, or then the marginal utility that I get from consuming the second cupcake, amounts to, let's say, 90. So we consume more cupcakes. So the third one, now I'm starting to think, it's still good, but it's not the same as the first one. So now it's a value of 70. The fourth one, it's now 30. The fifth one, it's now 5. And now I'm getting full. Now I've had enough, almost of it. So the marginal utility, the value, or the level of satisfaction, every time I consume the cupcake, it decreases. But the total utility that I get from consuming all of these cupcakes, that are all added together. So it's 100 plus 90 plus 70 plus 30 plus 5. Okay, so I haven't counted. So let's say it's 240 or 35 that I've now added together. So that's my total utility from the consumption of the 5 cupcakes. Okay, so important, as I continue to consume, there is a total increase in the total utility. So the total utility increases, but the marginal utility, the level of, or the value of each utility for each cupcake, slowly starts to decrease from 100 to 90 to 70 to 50 and so forth. Okay. So now when I actually maximize my utility when my marginal utility is equal to 0. So if I eat another 6 cupcake and the marginal utility is 0, that means I gain no more. I can eat it, but I gain no more satisfaction from consuming it. That is the point where you maximize your utility, your total utility. So at that point, your marginal utility should have a value of 0. If you continue to consume, your marginal utility will become negative. That means you will start to lower or decrease your total utility. I'll give you an example just now. So we call this decrease in marginal utility, we call that the law of diminishing marginal utility. So it's utility where the consumption increases, but the marginal utility slowly decreases as we consume more. Okay, so we call that the law of diminishing marginal utility. Okay, so how would one measure the utility? So let's, for example, use another example, different example of bananas. Okay, so we consume 1 to 9 bananas, and the marginal utility value as we consume each banana is provided in the table. So the first banana will be a marginal utility of 50. If we consume the second one, it will still add value. It will still be will still provide satisfaction, but not the same quantity or the same value. And that's 35, and it moves until 0. So we consume the 8th banana, but the marginal utility, the satisfaction that we get from using or consuming the 8th one, is 0. And then the 9th one, it becomes negative. Okay, so total utility will then, we add as we increase our consumption of a banana, what will be the total utility? So this is the total utility. So what we simply do is we just add them all together. So it's 50 plus 35 for the 2, so that's 85. If we consume another one, we add 29. If we consume another banana, we add 18, etc., etc. So we continue. So we see at the 8th banana that we eat, that we consume, the marginal utility is 0 and the total utility is now 152. So now we are at a maximum. So that means if you consume another one where the marginal utility is negative, our total utility will start to decrease. So this is then indicative of the law of diminishing marginal utility. Law of diminishing marginal utility, the more we consume, the lower the marginal utility, and our total utility increase, but at a slower or lower rate. Okay, so now we have a consumer which has to decide between 2 goods or 3 goods. Okay, so it's not just one good. So how will a consumer now decide how many of each good he wants or she wants to purchase in order for them to actually maximize their satisfaction or their utility? So, and in this case, what we're looking at is we are looking at the weighted marginal utility. We're looking at weighted marginal utility. So what is weighted marginal utility? We take the marginal utility and we divide it by the price. So each individual good, we take the marginal utility, we divide it by the price. This gives the consumer some idea of the value for money that they actually receive from each unit or service. Okay, so we do this for each individual product or good. For example, let's take this as an example. We have 3 goods. So we need to decide, we have meat, we have wine, we have bread. Okay, we need to decide how many of each are we going to buy in order to maximize our satisfaction or the utility. However, we need to also consider that we have some constraint, and the constraint that we have is our income. We can only buy a certain amount given the income that we have. Okay, but I'll discuss that a bit later. Let me come back to the weighted marginal utility. So the weighted marginal utility, again, it gives some idea of the value for money that consumers get when they consume or purchase one specific good. So we use the weighted marginal utility to identify where these 3 goods are equal. That means if the weighted marginal utility of the meat exceeds that of wine or bread, the consumer will continue to rather buy meat because they get higher satisfaction, more satisfaction from buying and consuming the meat. If the weighted marginal utility is equal for all 3 of them, the satisfaction or the level of utility satisfaction is equal, and they will then buy those amounts where they are equal. So if the weighted marginal utility of product wine exceeds that of bread, for example, the consumer will be better off buying wine instead of bread because he will receive a higher utility. Okay, I hope you understand that. So how do we determine equilibrium? 2 things we should consider. We should consider we have an income. So we only have 12 Rand. This is our budget. And we have 3 goods, each with their pricing. And then we have certain quantities. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, but given the marginal utility that we have, that will provide us with total utility. We're going to get the weighted marginal utility, which is marginal utility divided by the price. That's the weighted. Where these are equal across these 3 goods, the consumer will be equally satisfied. Okay, so it needs to be the same. So then they will be equally satisfied, and that is the options that they will choose. However, we need to consider the income. So let's look at an example. So we're going to give you some information, some data. So we populate the table. We give you marginal utility for consuming 1 meat, 2 meat. So we can actually now say, but total utility for 1 meat will be 54. And the weighted marginal utility, it's 54 divided by 1, and that stays 54. Okay, so total utility for consuming 2 meat. So that will be 54 plus 48 plus 48. So that will be 102. So the marginal utility, weighted marginal utility, will be 48 divided by 1, and that stays 48. Okay, so we do this for all the goods and the products. We will see that 144 minus 102. So the difference between that 2 should be this value here. So that is 42. Okay, now we don't have any other information below, but we can see a sequence. Okay, so it's every time it's minus 6. So this one will be 36. 36, and then it will be 30, and then it will be 24, and then it will be 18 and 12 and 6. Okay, and then we can actually complete this table here. We can use the information, we can complete both of them. So where will the consumer be in equilibrium? He will be in equilibrium where the weighted marginal utility of the 3 goods will be exactly the same, so that value, and then within the budget. So if you take the quantity and you multiply it by the value of the cost of the specific good, and you add them together, you should get 12 Rand. In that specific point at place, the consumer will be in equilibrium. Okay, and then just lastly, remember you should be able to also draw a demand curve and also draw a budget line. If you are given this information, you can actually draw both of them. I will make a separate video on that specific point.